Welcome back to the Hamilton Education Law Program. My name is Alex Baddick, and this is bullying and harassment. Bullying and harassment is a huge issue in schools across Ontario, and it's been going on for generations. So when we think about bullying and harassment, we think about some of the name calling, the picking on, the social exclusions, things that are harmful to children mentally, physically, emotionally. And the goal in this session will be to educate you on what is bullying and harassment, how does it manifest in schools, and how do parents advocate against the issues like this that arise in a school. So these things, bullying and harassment, are issues that are very prominent throughout our society. And the laws in place by the Ministry of Education are very clear about tackling and preventing bullying in schools. Nonetheless, it still happens every day, and every year we see some form of news in the headlines that indicate that bullying and harassment are still prevalent in the education system in Ontario. Now, the key to understanding your rights when it comes to bullying and harassment, your rights as a student and as a family, is that the Education Act guarantees a right to feeling safe and having a positive and inclusive environment with a positive climate. Your right to feeling comfortable in school is something that all students are entitled to. And when students make spaces unsafe and uncomfortable, that's a violation of a student's rights. Now, when we think about bullying, we have to understand and appreciate that bullying takes many different forms. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's obvious. Physical bullying tends to be that obvious, overt form of bullying. However, there are many other forms of bullying that are very subversive and very difficult to spot if you're not looking for it. For example, verbal bullying, sexual, racial, cyberbullying, prejudicial, and relational bullying are all subtle ways in which bullying can happen. So parents must be aware of these different forms of bullying. And when we think about bullying, we have to go to the definition, which school boards will typically make reference to in their very own policies. So bullying, whether it's racial or sexual or any of these stuff, means to be aggressive and typically repeat behavior that is intended to cause harm, fear, or distress to another individual. This might have the effect of creating a negative environment at a school. And the behavior occurs in a context where there's a real or perceived power imbalance between the student and the other individual. Now, bullying doesn't necessarily have to happen in person. Bullying can also happen online, and given uh, the fact that we live in contemporary society with electronic and many other devices available to us, cyberbullying is very, very prominent. Cyberbullying is the creating of a web page or a blog or assuming another person's identity. It can be impersonating another person as the author of a content or messages, or it can be communicating material electronically to more than one individual or posting material on a website. So bullying combined with the electronic means is what cyberbullying entails. Now, school codes of conduct typically cover behavior that is not desirable in a school climate. It typically ensures that there are penalties for bullying and conduct that is adverse to the experience of others in school. And if you want to go back to the videos and things we've done on student discipline, you'll see how some of these issues kind of compete with each other. So we might be talking about your rights to being safe in a space, which might involve the suspension or disciplining of a student. And immediately you might see that students who are threatened with suspension or suspended or expelled have rights of their own. And when it comes to schools, part of their jobs is to weigh the different and competing interests of individuals. Ultimately, the school looks at the collective group of students and the climate and safety of those students. That should be paramount, but the individual interests are still very important. So you might see schools put in a difficult position sometimes of trying to determine what the best outcome is for two individual students who have competing rights. So When it comes to cyberbullying, we know that bullying may occur online and it might even evolve into criminal acts. Bullying online can take the form of potentially fraud, defamation, or other libelous kinds of activities. Um, so, internet and social media is incredibly important, especially in the world today. With the use of Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, students have very much made social media their own. And in doing so, they've taken many of the dynamics of uh, schoolyard bullying and transferred that to the digital world. The consequences being that there can be much more palpable impacts on lives of students. But in having to monitor students and their internet and social media activity, again, the school must grapple between balancing the individual freedom and rights that might exist with students to make use of those platforms and an educational environment. So, for example, a student might feel that they are entitled to make a comment about another student, especially online. But when that starts to impact the educational environment, there may be a cause for concern for schools. And schools must decide how to, again, weigh those competing interests between the individual and the collective. So schools often side with the many and make restrictions according to that. But schools are tasked with creating prevention plans when they, knowing that they'll encounter bullying. Uh, Boards plans must be made available to the public either on their school website or in some other fashion. And principals must also post the plans and make them available. So the school's responsibilities are quite detailed when it comes to bullying and harassment. A principal must contact the parent or guardian of both the alleged aggressor and victim if they are able to identify a situation in which bullying has existed. And then an interview with both students and investigation must be done. If you're familiar with some of our past workshops, you'll know that investigations must be very thorough, not biased. They should essentially aim for this idea of natural justice by ensuring that the process is very it's fair, it's very neutral, it's one in which you can expect a thorough job to be conducted. And the consequences of bullying really depend on the results of the investigation. And when we talk about student discipline, we see an overlap here as well. Would be able to determine based on the conduct whether or not that's an offense that would require a suspension, or whether a school has the discretion in offering a suspension or not. And then we know that there are other factors that the school would have to consider if they were looking at suspensions in a discretionary format. They would have to consider the mitigating and progressive discipline that would have to be applied in the circumstances. But ultimately, the victim is the important party here, one of the most important parties here to pay attention to. They have to be provided with the appropriate counseling and ensure that the victim feels safe. But the consequences for the bully or the perpetrator must be confidential to also protect the bully in the circumstance. We know that penalties such as student discipline also have palpable, tangible effects on students. So there is also the goal to try and protect both students in a situation like this in different ways as well. But the school's responsibility, particularly teachers' responsibilities, are that they owe a standard of care to students when it comes to the idea of bullying. Bullying essentially happens on a teacher's watch if it's at school. Regardless of it being overt or covert, there's case law that says that teachers have a standard of care in those situations. And that's been described as a standard of care similar to that of a reasonably prudent parent. And what that means is that a reasonably prudent parent would probe and inquire into a child's life. So if they did look different or act different on some days, a reasonably prudent parent would inquire, would ask questions. Why are you feeling like what? What's going on? To learn a little bit more about the circumstances affecting them. So case law has actually found that when it comes to bullying, teachers should be taking proactive steps to inquire as to whether or not this is going on. And if teachers fail to do so, they may be liable for that if bullying is ongoing, and especially if it results in anything serious. Now, accusations of bullying are different um, situation to deal with. One might be put in a circumstance where bullying is alleged, and you may very well believe that you are not bullying a person, but it's the impact that really matters rather than intent. So, in thinking about being the accused in a situation, some things that you want to consider are that you don't have your accusations don't have to come from an authority figure. If someone suggests that you're being a bully or they're being bullied by you, it may have more to do with the impact rather than the intent of what's going on. You would want to find out why, learn a little bit more about what are the circumstances under which you're being accused. And if it is the case that the impact is a negative one, you may want to stop the bullying behavior immediately. And remember that bullying can happen even if you don't mean to be a bully. And I just want to reiterate this point over and over again, because one of the human rights principles is that intent is irrelevant to impact. So how you make a person feel is very relevant, and your intention, whether you meant to or not, is less important. So, as a victim or a person trying to identify a bully and hold them accountable, you want to make sure that you protect the evidence of the bullying. And by this, we mean look at the physical condition of the victim. If the victim is being bullied, you want to preserve the evidence of that. But you also want to make note of the evidence of that. But the physical condition isn't the only kind of condition you can make note of. There may be the emotional impacts of abuse or other harassing behaviors, emotional and mental abuse from that. There can be threatening exchanges through mediums such as texts and emails, or students may use Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, or other social media accounts. You can make use of these exchanges as evidence of bullying. And finally, you'd want to file a detailed report of a bullying incident. Every time you find an occurrence of this happening, just make a log of the dates, time, the who, what, where, when of what was going on to create a timeline of activities. For harassment, it tends to be repetitive behaviors as well that you want to demonstrate. So make note of incidents of bullying. And the consequences of bullying can range from mild to severe, and they really depend on the context in which you're looking at the bullying. There's several different ways in which we can look at the consequences for bullying. And the first is through the school. How does a school tend to deal with instances of bullying? Well, we know from student discipline that different forms of bullying may fall within the discretionary or non-discretionary codes of conduct that require behaviors that require the code of conduct to suspend a student. So suspensions or expulsions are very possible as a result of bullying. And if proven to be through an investigation and found that progressive discipline and mitigating factors would not or would support a suspension or expulsion, then you may be liable for that consequence. However, there are also criminal charges that might be granted for bullying and or harassment. Typically, it'd be regarded as harassment, where there's a repetitive, unwanted behavior that occurs, and simply a charge that's filed through the police would may be able to charge you based on the information gathered by a victim or any supportive ally or some third party of some sort. And finally, civil liability, where you can be sued in court potentially for harassing behavior, especially if there is online or physical proof through text messages or any other tangible evidence that can be relied on. So there is a lot of liability for bullying and harassing behaviors. But if you're a student, you want to make sure that you tell an adult. Speak to someone that you can trust, whether that's a parent, a teacher, or some other person that you can rely on to help you out. If you're being bullied, try to leave the area you are being bullied in. And I know that sounds easier said than done, but you want to protect your safety physically, emotionally, mentally. So if you're able to remove yourself from that circumstance, start with that, and then start moving into what other some of the other practical things that you can do to ensure that that stops happening. Never reply to harassing text messages. And again, easier said than done, but you are able to, in many circumstances, remove yourself from the situation if it's digitally. So, not responding to harassing messages is just one form of that. But you also want to make sure you save messages and save and preserve all forms of evidence that you can, because you do want to hold this person accountable for the behaviors. And if things do get a lot more serious, if there becomes physical or sexual violence, the use of threats, contact the police, give a detailed report, let them know what it is that you are facing. People need to be held accountable for behaviors that are unwanted and that have been made known that they are unwanted. But most importantly, and if you are or are not a bully, you want to speak whenever you see something. It's the silence that perpetuates a lot of the activities that bullies um, uh, indulge in. So raise your voice and let someone know that this is going on. Let an adult or an authority figure be aware of what is going on. So that's it for bullying and harassment. Again, it touched on a couple of different themes that we explore in some of the other workshops, particularly student discipline. And you may want to look into that a little bit more, as this idea of competing rights when it comes to the victim and the bully, the victim having the right to safe space, and the bully having the right to challenge a decision for suspension or an expulsion. Those are competing rights that may make it difficult for administrators, particularly principals, to find in to make a decision on. But it's important as parents, as advocates, to understand the depth of the rights and responsibilities that you have, as well as the obligations of schools in these different contexts. Equipping yourself with the knowledge of these things allow for you to be better advocates for your child. If you have any questions, please feel free to explore the Empowerment Square website or check out some of the other videos we have. Thank you.